If you don't read the newspaper, you're uninformed. If you do read it, you're misinformed. What is the long-term effect of too much information?
Information, I just need some information. I've been dying. Is it lack of education? I've been reading without any transformation. I'm addicted. Is it overstimulation? Hey.
Welcome to the Sixth Sense Report.
Hear ye, come on. You are listening to the Sixth Sense Report with Joel Nikoloff and Darnell Samuels.
Yo, man, do you know where I'm reporting from?
You're home in Mississauga?
My quarantine bunker, bro.
Oh, quarantine bunker, okay. Welcome back from what, Florida? Your time away?
Yeah, man. So, I mean, for the audience, you probably haven't realized, I mean, we haven't released a show in a couple weeks, but I was AWOL. It's basically November 25th. The government told me I couldn't play hockey no more, so I dipped and took off to Florida. I just came back.
How long were you gone for?
Actually, I came back yesterday, so like 32 days, 33 days, something like that. I mean, I wasn't on vacation. I was more like working holiday, sort of. I mean, half work, half vacation. I had ability to work remotely, so... You know, but yeah, being in Florida, I mean, people are going to tell me I'm crazy for going to Florida because they listen to the news and don't actually look at any of the numbers. I mean, if you look at Florida as like let's say cases per million in comparison to, you know, other states, they're basically, you know, doing far better than places like California that are locked down to the crazy, and they're sort of in line with everybody else. But you know, of course, the government told you, or government, well, basically the government, but the politicians and the you know, the media told us how Florida was doomed because their governor refused to, you know, sort of have any of these crazy mandates be allowed.
So they didn't stick anything up your nose?
No, I came home. I went there. You know, I didn't have to do any tests. I got to stay home for 14 days. Let's just say I'm very blessed that I have a mother who loves me. Came home to like a fully stocked house full of food because we're not allowed to leave. So, you know, I got family to hook me up. So that it made life easier. We were actually hoping the rapid tests would get rolled out before, which would have made quarantine a lot faster. But I guess with all this craziness, you know, people weren't too happy if I guess the rapid test showed up at the airport. Anyways, yeah, I mean, but what's crazy, like, you know, in Florida, it was normal. Like, honestly, you see people wearing masks, like in the grocery store, but... You know, there's the governor prevented them from enforcing the mask mandates, but I would still say like 95% of people are wearing masks. You know, you go to a restaurant, the capacity is not limited, but they did things. You know, you're supposed to wear a mask to the table. You know, they probably we were at a pizza place and they had put like you know, shields between the booths. Right, so technically there's like a plastic shield in between each of the booths, but in general, like, you know, no businesses are shut. You know, all the businesses are going. You know, I would say most, you know, they might have had some reduced capacity stuff, but in general, you know, it felt like relatively normal life. And I would argue, it's generally speaking, these are all people really on their own volition deciding what is the best course of actions for me and my family during this enhanced time of risk. And, you know, my criticism towards government during all of this craziness has been they're treating us like children. You know, paternalism. There's no sort of, you're adults. You can make decisions for yourself. You know, we'll educate you on the risk. We'll educate you on how to protect yourself and make the decisions that are best for you, and let businesses, you know, make decisions. If you know, what I loved, I know I'm sort of kind of going on a tirade, but when COVID first happened, if people remember, businesses, grocery stores started saying, oh, all the elderly, we're only serving them from, you know, 9 to 10. The first hour of the day is for the high risk individuals. No, nobody mandated that, but now that they put in all the mandates, that's gone.
Okay. So now let's try to turn to a more hopeful, brighter side instead of being a negative Nikoloff.
Dude, I was so happy in Florida. It was amazing. So it was, if you're to not be so negative, I'll say go to Florida if you're needing an escape.
Okay. Okay. So we're here to give you hope, because hope is dope. All right, 2021, looking towards a better year. Although low key, 2020 was a blessing for me, but this is not about me. This is about you. This is about you guys, and looking at 2021 and having hope in light of COVID. So what the angle that we're going to take with this episode is we're going to look at how historically, how innovation, the Industrial Revolution has helped us to get to a point of getting closer to a solution to COVID-19, and that there is a brighter side to life in regards to coming to a solution to getting over this whole COVID pandemic thing. So the things we're going to talk about is healthcare and how that's improved, work, how that's improved, sociality, how that's improved, and how spiritually we've improved. Right? So the key question that we want you guys to think about as we go through this episode is, was there a better time to be alive? Now, I like to follow the Fraser, the good people at the Fraser Institute, and I take a lot of their online student courses. And so there was a course called The Brighter Side of COVID-19 with Marian Tupy. And so
it'll be in the show notes page if you want to watch it for yourself.
Yeah. So it was really good. And so for those of you who don't know, Marian Tupy is the editor of humanprogress.org, which is a really cool website you should check out. So he's a senior fellow at the Center for Global Liberty and Prosperity and the co-author of Simon Project. He specializes in globalization and global well-being and the politics and economics of Europe and Southern Africa. His articles were published in the Financial Times, the Washington Post, Los Angeles Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Atlantic, Newsweek, the UK Spectator, Foreign Policy, and various other outlets. So he's been in the United States, overseas. He's appeared on BBC, CNN, CBN, all that stuff. The great stuff. Okay, so he wrote an article called COVID-19 Should Make Us Grateful for Technology. So we'll be discussing that and also his lecture that I was a part of. And so the key thing is, again, was there a better time to be alive? So what we see that one of the main arguments he makes is that healthcare has improved because of the innovation and being able to have better computers, which helps us to process information faster. Right? So because of, first the perspective that he takes is that from the time of Christ, there were 300 million people in the world. Today we're at 7.8 billion. So the population has grown, and we did an episode in a couple episodes ago about population growth and people being worried that there isn't enough land and we're gonna die because there's just too many people. But he's arguing that with the 7.8 billion people, when you have more people, people not just are extra mouths to feed, but they actually bring ideas and they bring innovation. And they make life better. The more people you have, the more ideas. So because of better ideas, now we have people living longer than they used to. Right? So that's kind of the angle with the better healthcare. So with more people, better ideas, and people live longer.
Mm-hmm. And I heard it recently. I don't know which podcast I was listening to. I'm this bad. But anyways, that like in the last couple of years, our average age has grown significantly. It was like literally increasing from like low 70s to basically 80 is the average death, or average age of death. I think it was like 72 and now it's pushed up to 80. And that's only been in recent years. And the simplest cause is technology. I mean, I'm simple in the sense of I'm just drilling it down. There's different innovations that are leading to those increases, from, healthcare to also food and different things. So
yeah. But I would also add that he talks about diseases. So he asked the question in the lecture, which communicable disease killed the most people in human history? And so he lists 6, right? So there's smallpox, there's malaria, HIV/AIDS, number 3, Ebola, number 4, typhoid, and cholera. Sorry, is that cholera?
Corella, I think, is what it was. Yeah, and typhoid. Yeah,
yeah. And so he was talking about how long it took for us to come to
how long those diseases have been around before some sort of solutions get derived, right? So malaria was the oldest one, and just think of anti-malaria. And HIV and AIDS was on there too, right? And so it's and now, if I understand correctly, AIDS is no longer considered a death sentence, or maybe it's HIV. I don't remember that. Right. So the idea of, I think the reason I want to jump on that one is because his point was sort of demonstrating that, malaria has been around for thousands of years, since the beginning of man. He made a reference to there was a mosquito in amber that they found malaria in from, millions of years ago, as he put it. The malaria has been around forever, and we only recently have come up with, solutions, I'll say. And then AIDS sort of being on the other end of the spectrum of something that we've very quickly, been able to remove the idea of a death sentence.
Right.
So I think those two just demonstrate a really good polar opposites from his list.
Yes. So the answer is malaria. It's malaria, which was the communicable disease that killed the most people in human history. And that took us about, what was it? It was 1,471 years to come to a solution. Now, in his chart,
No, that's measles.
Okay, yeah, sorry, that was measles.
On his chart. Yeah, no, malaria is basically all of human history is sort of his point, whereas the other diseases are 3,000 years. So malaria is the longest one. It's not even on his chart because it's so far, it would make everything else disappear on this chart that you're looking at. Mm-hmm. But he's also talking about vaccine development on the chart you're looking at, Darnell. And so, polio, he references, took 3,400 years to come up with a vaccine. Rubella and diphtheria, he's saying 400 years, 300 years. And that's just basically from the time we discovered it until, the solution. But the reason I wanted to focus, to some extent, I was focusing on the other aspects of the chart, was because HIV and AIDS and malaria, technically they don't have anything that is going to make them, the vaccine argument is that we can eradicate something. Well, both malaria and AIDS, we don't have something to eradicate, but I think those sort of demonstrate an alternative where we have a solution, but it took 10,000 years to come up with a solution, and AIDS took 40 years, or I'm rounding, but something that was considered a death sentence no longer, or people's lives are extremely extended when discovered. So from a healthcare perspective, I think those two demonstrate how pre-1900 even how little we knew with healthcare. Right? How little healthcare was able to help us. And not in the sense of extending life, in the sense of curing things, the medical advances are continuing to grow. And this, to some extent, corresponds also with the population of the world.
Yeah, most definitely. So when we look at the point that we're living at right now, there's no greater time in the world and in the world history to fight a global pandemic. So when we look at work, And I think that's also helpful, because when we look at where we are in history, yes, COVID is we're present in the midst of COVID, but we're still able to work because like 1/3 of people are able to work remotely and work from home because of technology, right? So the greater access to the internet. So that way we can share information, right? When news travels slow, people die. But because of the internet, news travels fast on regards to who's developing what's working, what's not working, and then we can have a quicker cycle of trial and error versus, like, let's say 500 years ago, where, you know, if there's a plague of sickness going around, it's hard to communicate. Okay, well, hey, don't come to this area. Hey, this is working. This is not working. So because of better technology, we can get to a solution faster.
Yeah, I mean, technology, you know, it has so many layers to it, right? It also increases the communicability, right? So think about in the past, a pandemic, you know, you couldn't necessarily get a worldwide pandemic with, you know, pre-1900s when it took someone, you know, they were crossing on a boat as opposed to flying, right? You know, outbreaks would have been very limited, right? So there's I'm sort of presenting the opposite side of it too, right? The fact that we have so many flights and so much transportation around the world, the ability to spread a disease around the world is also increased.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's important because, like, if you think about it, you know, better computers, that way we can punch in a genetic code for COVID, and then we can match it up with potential drugs that can help, right? So these things are important when we're thinking about where we are right now in history in regards to fighting this. Yeah,
and I mean, you know, it's sort of related, but you know, the data that we have, you know, regardless of where you stand on, let's say, government response and let's say government use of data, as most people would know where I stand if they're on my Facebook page. The data is going to exist. The data is something that 5 years from now, when I would argue this becomes less politicized, hopefully, the facts will start to bear themselves out, because that this data, the way we can run these, you know, algorithms and different things like through systems and regression models in order to actually evaluate things and you know, in statistical terms, this idea of like delimiting the data, where we start to isolate the multiple variables, right? So, I mean, I recently remember reading something about, you know, vitamin D deficiency was common in 80% of patients, right? Or people with, I think, that died of COVID. And so, you know, things along those lines, as we continue to decipher the data, dig through, understand this, you know, it also allows us to, you know, learn faster, right? One of I would say my criticism of all of this was that government responded as in a manner that wasn't, hey, let's pause things so we can learn. You know, there wasn't a caution because we need to learn about the disease. We need to learn how fast it spreads. That sort of was taking a backseat to some of the other things. But I would argue that the more we progress, the more quickly, let's say, a virus could be identified, and you know, what's the spread ratio, or what populations are at risk? Because, to be honest, I would say, Darnell, the one thing, you know, we're sort of talking about hope, but I would argue the biggest part of hope is that with more computing power, we are going to continue to learn more about the body. I would argue we are actually still exceptionally ignorant about so much of how the body works. And that's because, you know, most of our information comes from a very like trial and error method, you know, the statistical double-blind placebo study type stuff, as opposed to, you know, let's say actually deciphering the genetic code. And hopefully, as we continue to improve computer, you know, technology and power, you know, the level of information that we start to have about the body continues to grow exponentially.
Yeah. But like I was saying before about like when we look at work, and now most people are able to work from home and still be able to make an income during the lockdowns in this difficult time. So he writes in his article that the service sector today consists of jobs in the information sector. So investment services, technical and scientific services, healthcare and social assistance services, as well as in the arts, entertainment, and recreation. right? So you got these online trainers and all this stuff. But most of these jobs are less physically arduous, more intellectually stimulating, and better paid than either agricultural and manufacturing jobs ever were. So crucially, many of these service sector jobs can be performed remotely. That means that even in the midst of the government imposed economic shutdown, some work, about a third, estimates suggest, can go on. The economic losses of COVID-19, in other words, will be astronomical, but not total.
Yeah, I mean, I would just qualify that to say some of those economic costs are due to government response and not due to COVID. But anyways, what I think is important, your point, sort of the way you started this episode about, is there ever a better time to be alive, or also about, we're in a place where we are most equipped to handle a pandemic like this. What I think is important to remember is also, for most people that, we don't even perceive what the world was like 100 years ago.
We forget.
Well, it's not even that we forget. We didn't even know, right? We need to go read a book and try to comprehend life experiences when 95% of the world had to work that day in order to feed themselves.
Right, of course. And what's fascinating is that, we've come a long way. And if you think about, like, for example, in the 15th century England, disposable income, about 80% of it would go to food, because people will say food is expensive now, but in the 15th century, it was 80% of your income that went towards food. But now, today, people spend 5% of their income on food, right? And it's not even just that, but our food has gotten better. We've gotten smarter about how to eat and how to build up our immune system through eating properly. So again, like, there's no better time.
And it's all, our food has also gotten worse at the same time.
Well, hey, it depends.
Well, my point is, like,
hey, don't be a negative Nickloff, man.
No. But my point is that, yes, we have now the ability to, like, grow crops that are more efficient in this, or not even efficient. Think of, like, bananas, right? Like, we've made them straighter through, intentional cropping, let's just call it. Different. My point is that, yeah, we can make food better, but we also have, cereal boxes. As my father used to say, you'd be better off eating the box.
I'm going to use that one. Eating the box.
My point is to say, like, we now, there's a level of abundance where, food is gluttonous for the most part. And I think.
Or you mean people are gluttonous?
No, but like, my point is that when food was 80% of your income, you didn't eat food for gluttony. It wasn't even an option unless you were a king. Right? Like, for 95% of the population, food as gluttony was not even comprehensible. Whereas I would argue today, for 90% of population, food as gluttony is probably a regular occurrence. Now, I'm just using the example of eating a bag of chips as, I'm not saying gluttonous in a sinful manner, but, like, it's pleasure. It's, I'm not eating it because I need to sustain myself. I'm eating it because I want mouth pleasure. Like, I want to taste things that are enjoyable. I want to tantalize my senses.
Yes. Yes.
And so, there's a spectrum there with food. And the idea, though, is that why I brought up, 95% of the world having to work to feed themselves was also so much before the Industrial Revolution in terms of efficiency of
Industrial Revolution
farming
is 18th century, just in case people are thinking, when does that start?
And so the idea that not your entire family is on the farm, right? Like, we don't need vast portions of the population to grow food. Right. Is what is, like, the reason why you can work on a computer today instead of going to the field.
Right.
Because we have machinery and Industrial Revolution we can thank. Now, people might want to argue about there's some potentially arguable or debatable content. That's not the point. The point is the result of the Industrial Revolution is now farming, which is fundamental for human life, no longer requires a significant portion of the population. And this goes back to his point about more people isn't inherently a problem. More people creates more, more mouths to feed. But when I've made feeding mouths more efficient, it also creates more people to do more things. And so, I can pay someone to do my plumbing because I don't want to deal with it. and someone can specialize in it and do it well.
Right. No. And so here's a fun fact about food. The USDA recommends 2,000 calorie diet per person per day on average. So what's the calorie supply in sub-Saharan Africa today? And so in the survey he put, there's 5, if you want to write these down. So there's 5 options. There's 1,000 calories per day, 1,500, 2,000, 2,500, or 3,000. So again, the USDA recommends 2,000 calorie diet per day. So what's the calorie supply in sub-Saharan Africa today? And so the correct answer, so if we're 2,000, everybody voted in the seminar 2,500, but the correct answer is 3,000.
No, well, I'm going to correct you because I just listened to it.
Yeah, well, no, I'm not done talking.
Okay, fine.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I'm not done talking, man. So,
okay.
So he goes on to say, well, the reason why, well, of course, so the correct answer is 3,000, but the reason why their calorie intake is higher than ours is because of obesity and our very high calorie intake, like Joel was saying. But yeah, go ahead, Joel.
So he was talking about production. So the question was the recommended consumption is 2,000. The production capacity of sub-Saharan Africa, most people would put a very low number. They picked the lower ones, thinking of poverty.
Yes.
But in reality, they have a production of 2,500. The rest of the world average is 3,000. And so what his point was that sub-Saharan Africa produces enough food in and of themselves to feed all the people. Now you could get into the idea of how do you get it to everybody because of, let's say, a less built up society, a third world country sort of problems. But it's a surprise. He said, I think only 12% of the audience, or the people, got the right answer on that survey. But in the other side of it is in North America, we produce 3,000. We only need to eat 2, and we actually consume much more than the 2. And your answer of obesity is, goes back to the gluttony discussion. But what's intriguing and what's important, I think, and maybe there's a different part of that me and you are referencing, but what I found really intriguing was that, I was not guessing that they were overproducing the needs because of what we hear about with like World Vision, Compassion Canada, like these organizations that are helping third world countries, right, with regards to starvation and feeding. I would not have expected that they were producing more per person than what's recommended from a healthy adult diet.
Yeah, so we are doing better. We are doing better. Now the next point is sociality and how we interact with each other socially, and that's improving. So yes, in light of the lockdowns, it sucks, but what people have been doing now is actually cherishing those moments that you do have with people face to face. And when that day does come, I think we'll when COVID will be behind us, we'll definitely not take those moments for granted when we're with people. But in light of the technology that we do have, as much as I'm annoyed, and it's just me, I don't put that on the listeners, it's just me, but sometimes I'm a bit zoomed out. In light of this, Christmas holiday and being on lockdown, and everybody wanting to do family dinners,
Zoom calls,
Zoom dinners, and Zoom birthdays. Don't message me, man.
Dude, I'm the same. Like, I don't want none of that. Like, someone like, at the same time, like, I'm appreciative. Jenna's been all over it. Like, it's like we have again, we come here. My mom has gifts for us, stockings, like, and it's like, okay, I want to be appreciative of that. And so, like, we FaceTime or Facebook chat call my mom, and she watches the kids open their gifts and stuff like that. Like, there's value there.
Your mom did that?
Man,
that's super mom, man. Super
my
grandma.
mom, dude. My mom's dude. I told you, when I got home, my mom had my fridge full of food for us. Like, we gave her a grocery list, and she went shopping for us because, like, we're trapped in our house for 14 days.
No, but even the fact that even the fact that she wanted to see your kids open the gifts.
Well, but that's where, like, I would say Jenna, my wife, is like overly intentional to be like, hey, I want to show your mom appreciation. So make sure we don't open them until we can have a video call with them.
Okay, yeah, no,
right. So annoyed. Like, no, but that's where it's like I'm like I don't really, part of me is like I don't really care. And similar,
actually, no,
right,
he does care, Jenna. He really does care.
No, but what I mean is I'm agreeing with you that, like, I'm zoomed out, right? Like, with work, we have Zoom calls. Like, when I was in Florida a couple times, like, I had a couple really big meetings, and I was like a 4-hour Zoom call, and I was like, I got off and I'm like, my face hurts. Like, I'm done with this, right? But, like, it's I actually prefer, like, of all the Zoom stuff, we've had friends that we've played, like, some online games with. So we'll do a Zoom call and then play a game online with them at the same time.
Yes.
Like, I've been more appreciative of those things because it's like, there's no, like, necessity to it. We're doing it to have fun, to make the best of the situation. But the, like, the Christmas stuff, like, I got to have a Zoom call with this person. It just seems so, like, obligatory. And that's where it's just like, man, we can't be together. Like, let's just get together when we can get together, and so in that sense, because I think, to your point, like, I value the fellowship so much more, whether it's, in a Christian context, but also in friend context, because you're realizing how much nothing is the same.
Yes.
Right? Like, phone calls are good, but I'd rather be sitting there next to a buddy of mine, drinking a beer, having the same conversation.
It's funny because even, like, in light of Thanks Coach, the other podcast that I do, guys have been messaging me. They're like, oh, so, when are you going to do season 2? And honestly, I'm like, I love the face-to-face one-on-one interaction. And so whatever interviews I do with the guys, I always want to do it in person versus on the line. Because even, like, there's a lot of podcasts on YouTube, right? And they're doing it virtual. And I hate it. I hate it so much because I'm like, man, this interview, every interview I watch, man, this would have been so better if those guys were in the same room. Oh man, this guy's audio sucks. This guy's camera sucks. And actually, you know what? Can I, Joel, can I just take about, 30 seconds to be a negative Negro in light of 2021 COVID?
I've taken up enough time already for both
just
of
a
us,
little,
but
just
go
little,
ahead.
just-
I'll give you
just a
some.
little.
I'm sure the audience will give you some grace.
Just a little. One of the reasons why I do not like Zoom is because I'm black. Okay? Now, for those of you guys who don't understand what I mean by that, is like, if you don't have good lighting, like, white people can get away with doing Zoom calls at any time of the day. But if the sun's gone down and my lighting sucks and I'm going to do Zooming, like, I'm just going to look like just really dark, like, and there's nothing wrong with being dark skinned, but I mean, like, I'm looking like Daffy Duck with his beak shot off, like that kind of black. And it's just not flattering. So I'm always reluctant when people are like, oh yeah, let's do a Zoom. And I'm like, the lighting isn't exactly,
I have to?
This isn't flattering. Like, oh yeah, do a YouTube. I'm like, well, I don't have a halo light, man. Like black people just can't just jump on Zoom and make it work. Right? You gotta have the lighting's gotta hit our skin in a certain way, man. But anyways, all right, back to being hopeful for 2021. But as far in his article, he says that so sociality and human beings are inseparable, as we have all been clearly reminded by the sudden restrictions on our ability to interact with others. As we sit at home working away on our computers or watching television, most of us feel a tremendous sense of isolation, social distancing, from our family, friends, and colleagues. The urge to be around others is innate in us. It is who we are. Dissatisfied with the impersonal modes of communication such as email and texting, we have rediscovered the need for a face-to-face interaction with our fellow humans. To the end, we utilize digital platforms such as Zoom, Google Hangouts, Facebook Live, and FaceTime to catch up on the latest news in other people's lives, or simply to complain about the misery of loneliness and the pathetic inadequacy of our public officials of both parties.
But pump.
But yeah, but even like when we do actually get around people, when we do have those times, it's definitely precious. And you know, I have friends that when I do see them, you know, we kind of look at each other and we just hug, and we're like, come on, man, Leo, just hug me, man. And we just hug. And you're just like, wow, man, I totally miss that. I never thought I'd say that, but yeah, I miss hugging. When I was as a teacher, when I was in my class, you know, before the Christmas break, and I'm in a class of 28 kids, and what I noticed was that, like, especially the boys in the classroom, like, they couldn't get enough of physical contact. Like they like to huddle up a lot, so there's no social distancing being done. And it's not, you know, as much as you tell them, like, you know, boys are just generally, you know, they'll huddle up, or they like to brush and bump each other, you know, like bump somebody's shoulder and like, hey, yo, what are you doing, man? Just there's just constant wanting to be around each other, and the face-to-face interaction and the actual dealings of not necessarily touching each other, but actually, like, you know how guys do like a shot in the arm, a brush on the shoulder, and so forth. So I noticed that those guys were kind of craving that kind of interaction. So that's something we're definitely missing, and something that we're definitely not going to take for granted going forward.
Yeah, no, I can definitely agree. I mean, you know, when the lockdowns, or, you know, when things were, man, being able to play hockey once a week, honestly, everybody on my team was like, I need this. Like, we were allowed to play over the summer, man. I had to become an exhibitionist because we had to get changed in the parking lot. Like, you know, basically put on all our gear with the exception of our skates and gloves and helmet, and walk into the rink. You know, and like most of the guys were like, whatever I got to do, man. I just want to play. Like, and there's the camaraderie side of it. I would say, like, I've always, you know, I've been with this team. Me and a buddy of mine have been running the team for like a decade, and we've always had a really good, you know, community, or like the room has just been great, and so, you know, there's the community side of it, but there's, you know, just being physical, playing sports, like, oh man, team sports is like something I want to do for the rest of my life.
Yeah, so. Yeah, we definitely miss that, and hence when we watch like sports now, it's still weird to watch it without the fans. You're like, man, this just looks weird.
Yeah, but I mean, even watching it when I can't do it is weird. Like, I don't have the same level of like interest when I'm like, well, you're allowed to play. Right. I don't know. I mean, I'm still watching. I'm still interested, but I'm just, it's not the same.
Yeah.
It's not the same.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah.
So the last thing before we wrap up, spirituality. Do you want to go first?
Yeah. So with spirituality, now this wasn't a point on Ted Tupy. This wasn't anything on Marian Tupy's list, but I thought it was something to add to our list on spiritually, how we've improved because of COVID, because of, you know, the deaths around us, and it being a potentially deadly disease, people are thinking deeply about, where they go when they die and so forth. And so, in light of the technology that we have now, we have better information. We have to research where we are spiritually. What does this religion say? Is there an afterlife? And so for me, I felt like, my grandpa wasn't well, and I was worried that, he was going to pass. And so I wanted to share the gospel with him. And so, to be honest with you guys, I haven't been on my A game spiritually. And, the zeal to share the gospel hasn't been there like it has in the past. And so when I usually get into a spiritual slump, I like to read and take in content that is Christ centered. So I always retreat to Christology. Anything that has to do with the glorification of Christ, I want to take it in because it helps me to become sober and realign my thoughts. So anyways, while I'm not reading, I'm listening to podcasts. So I was listening to Bible Project, and I really love the Bible Project, and they do a very good job of biblical theology, which is, outlining the story of redemptive history. I'm just a nerd for that as well. And so I'm listening to an episode on the wrath of God as Christ taught it. And I'm like, okay, man, this is going to give me a kick in the butt that I need to be, passionate and urgent and go preach the gospel to the lost. And then, I'm listening to it, and then they were basically, dumbing
Heresy.
down. Well, there was a lot of things that they were saying that I was kind of like, I was taken aback by, where they were basically holding to a view called conditional immortality, or another strand is annihilationism, meaning that hell is not eternal. And so I hold to a traditional view that hell is forever. And so during this time, while on COVID, on lockdown, I was doing a lot of reading, listening to the rest of their podcasts to kind of see where they were coming from. And it led me down this path of studying the eternality of hell. And it helped me to sober up and really find out what it is I really believe in. And so that was helpful for me because we have all this technology and these resources to figure out where do we go when we die and so forth. So that's why I want to bring this up.
I mean, I'm with spirituality, I would say, like, I think I've been shocked, sort of related, sort of not related. I've been really shocked with a lot of Christians in this time. It seems, in my opinion, that I'm shocked with the level of fear. And at the same time, I'll say, like, there's a level that I understand, right? Like, as a parent, I don't fear death, but I fear not being here for my kids. But, from a Christian perspective, we know that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of understanding, or the beginning of knowledge, or, where is our, what are we fearful, or what do we have reverence to first, right? Do we trust God in the worst case scenario that he will take care, right? He knows the number of hairs on my head, but am I still overly fearful in the world as it is today? And I bring that up because I think if the fear of death is something that that currently exists right now because of the pandemic, what you said as a response, what you were talking about is the proper response, which is urgency to preach the gospel. Right? If you are truly afraid that you're going to die or people around you are going to die, if you're, biblically minded, then the response, in my opinion, should be to preach the gospel. Because either I'm using my last days as efficiently as possible for God's glory, or I want to preach the gospel before that loved one of mine passes. And it seems that so much of our culture has become just afraid, and the response is trust the government, which I know is a different conversation, but to me that's sort of like, okay, that doesn't sound like the biblical response to being afraid. It sounds like the man's response to take my fear away.
Yeah. No, I would also add, Joel, to what you were saying. It remind me of the verse, 1 John chapter 4, verse 18. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. For fear has to do with punishment, and whoever fears has not been perfected in love. Right? Because like part of like the craziness that we see people doing is that it's out of fear. And then fear only causes us to do to do foolish things. And so I think when you look at yourself as a person, and say, okay, I get scared too. Like I have an anxiety about dying as well. But when I go to the text and I start to reflect, and as much as it's scary as studying hell and the eternality of hell, as scary as it was also very comforting. It was comforting in two ways, in that it made me realize that God is good, and he will serve perfect justice to those people who get away with their crimes. Right? So all the people who do terrible things and get away with it, because it does happen. Crime does pay in some instances. But in the end, God will do what is right, and he'll achieve perfect justice. But also that it's comforting to me that I am perfected by love, that I'm not afraid of judgment, because Jesus Christ has died for my sins. So judgment hasn't come to me. Right. So this is something for me that I was just like, okay, wow, actually, I feel a lot better. I feel a lot sober. It puts things in priority. What takes priority right now in my life? I wake up in the morning and I'm like, okay, you know what? Let me pray first. Let me appreciate time with my family. Let me share the love of God with people who don't know. I'm more brave to do right things and put myself in harm's way to help other people. Mm-hmm. Right. And so that's why this study of the eternality of hell was helpful, especially for people who are alone and trying to figure out, okay, what's going on in the world. I thought that the annihilationism idea, and just for people who are kind of wondering, so annihilationism is basically not existing anymore, and then conditional immortality is you exist for a time and then you cease to exist. So like you go to hell for a time, you serve your debt, and then you cease to exist. And that's a view that Tim Mackey of the Bible Project holds, which I totally disagree with. And if you're wondering where he's getting this from, so the scriptures, so he has two like main hermeneutic principles. A hermeneutic is a principle in which you use to interpret scripture. So he uses one that says the scriptures that speak of final justice use metaphor and imagery, like fire in Mark chapter 9, verse 47 to 48, and darkness in Matthew chapter 8, verse 12. So the idea of the metaphor is a reality that's beyond words. And then the other one is that he uses this argumentation where he says, nowhere in the Bible does it say God created hell, or nowhere in the Bible does it say Jesus received the wrath of God. And that's something he said. He said those things. Okay, well, in the beginning, God creates the heavens and the earth. He doesn't create hell. Right? But instead, he's making an argument that hell comes from human beings and they create hell.
Uh-oh.
Joel Steen. No, I'm gonna start calling it Joel Osteen. He's like, what?
What you talking about, Willis?
But yeah. So the idea, and I know if I can unpack that further. So the idea, like when you look at the idea of like his doctrine of the atonement, meaning how God reconciles us to God. So he says that Jesus Christ, the Son of God, his crucifixion is substitutionary in that he is a substitute. He substitutes himself with Jesus Barabbas, the son of the Father, the insurgent revolutionary who represents Israel. And so this is the substitution he's talking about. So he's not saying, okay, well, the wrath of God was poured out on the Son on behalf of the people he would come to save. It's more so Jesus substituting himself with Barabbas, whose name is actually Jesus, and Barabbas means son of the Father, and Jesus Christ is the Son of God. Now, and so I'm not straw manning Tim Mackie. He's very humble about his stance. He's very genuine about his stance, and that was helpful. And seeing that, he's genuine about his view, even though I disagree with it. So he's not like arrogant or sloppy about it. Yeah, so that's where he's coming from, which is a bit odd for some people. So for some of you guys who are keeping score at home, you're probably thinking, okay, so how is he defining hell? Right? So Tim Mackie defines hell as hell is about God honoring our decision for a life and identity apart from him. And he gets this from C.S. Lewis, where C.S. Lewis talks about hell is God's great movement or great monument to human free will and choice. Right? So he goes on to say, like, God's wrath. And he makes the argument from Romans chapter 2, where it's talking about God turning people over to their sins. And so he says God's wrath is being God's wrath is God handing over Gentile his people to Gentile nation. Hence why the Jewish people being handed over to the Romans if they continue in their ways. Right? So this is how anger and wrath are thought of in the Hebrew Bible. So we see in the Old Testament God turning the people over to pagan nations, the Babylonians, and so forth, and other nations that oppress them. And then we see in the New Testament they're being oppressed by the Romans. But also we see on an individual aspect in Romans 2, God turning people over to their sins. So he'll say, yes, the wrath of God is revealed today, not later. Right? Again, I enjoy the Bible Project. I think a lot of their stuff is, well, some of their stuff is good. But I didn't say a lot. I had to preface, like, some of their stuff is good. But the idea is just that, you got to be careful what you listen to. And in light of COVID-19, death is at everybody's doorstep. Anybody can die. We want to make sure that we have our paperwork right. But let me ask you, Joel, what's your take? What's your 2 cents on the whole thing?
I think, we've sort of talked through, the reasons to be hopeful. For the listener who follows my Facebook or sees the content I share, you'll probably know that I would argue there's lots of reasons to be concerned, and not so much about COVID or what, but let's say the government's response. And there's a tweet recently. This guy Zuby, who's like, I think he's a music artist, but I know him more so because of his entrepreneurial stuff. He's like, I don't know how anyone could go through 2020 and say, you know what I need in my life? More government. But I think so many people, I don't know that that's actually true for them. So, I look at, the stuff we've talked about with the reasons to be hopeful, but I think the next, that to me is what's hopeful for 2025, what's hopeful for 2030 as we continue to move forward and technology and innovation continues to improve life and to improve the way things work. But I think 2021 is going to be a really interesting year to see where, does government get put in its proper place with regards to when they've overstepped, when they've, violated rights, and in the Canadian Charter's perspective, when they can't make the proper claim that violating one right was justified based on other rights. or in the U.S. scenario where they've violated inalienable rights unjustly. I think that's something, when I look forward to 2021, seeing how those things start to play out, hopefully we define government's role for the future, a future scenario like this, to be more clearly defined, because I think it's pretty obvious that this year was the blind leading the blind, and that's been disappointing. What about you, Darnell? What's your 2 cents?
I think that, if we look back at 2020, I think that there were some hidden blessings that came. These unique situations that forced us to appreciate the small things, and I think appreciating the small things is a big blessing. So look back, count your blessings from 2020, and in light of innovation, 2021 looks bright. So if we look at it like from a Christian perspective, God does not only care about where we go when we die. In light of, studying where we go when we die in hell and the eternality of it, but he also cares about what we do when we wake up in the morning, namely our behavior, our actions, actions that promote human flourishing as he commanded all men to do in the first Great Commission in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26 to 28, which is promoting human flourishing. So we know God has been with us and the earth because we've seen these things come to pass in technological innovation, which has made our life easier, better healthcare, better food, better working conditions, better medicine, right? So these are blessings from God that are getting better. Now what we also see is that it's also made our lives easier, safer, and it has helped spread the saving message of the gospel further and clearer, which goes on to fulfill the second Great Commission, which is Matthew chapter 28, verse 18 to 20, which is to go and make disciples in the name of Jesus. So, going into 2021, praying for all our listeners. Thank you guys for all your support for the past year. And yeah, I'm excited to see what 2021 brings. Not perfection, but definitely some advancement.
Yeah, and for this issue, if you think there's an aspect of technology that we haven't given enough credit to, give us your 2 cents. Let us know. Maybe there's other aspects of technology or the world we live in today that you're hopeful for, that maybe we can use as a launch pad for another episode. So hit us up, sixcentsreport@gmail.com, sixcentsreport on Twitter, Facebook. Yeah, we like listener inspired topics.
All right, guys, remember 6 cents makes change, and God loves you.
But you heard me? Does that make sense?
And oh, that God would raise up in this room and across this country and the world young preachers who leave their hearers with a spiritual sense of shock at the sense of God. Some sense of the infinite weight of the glory of God. That's my longing, that's my prayer, that God would raise up thousands of broken-hearted, Bible-saturated preachers who are dominated by a sense of the greatness and the majesty and the holiness of God as He has been decisively revealed in Jesus Christ through the gospel of Christ crucified, risen, and reigning today over all nations, all armies, all cancer cells, and all politics, and all churches, and all false religions. That there would be a gripping of pastors today of the amazing weight of the absolute claims of the Lordship of Christ over the nations and over everybody in your city. They will bow or they will burn.